So perhaps just talk a little bit about kind of climate challenge and just transition in Ireland, kind of what the key trends are, and how this is really kind of manifesting in the kind of counties and communities in the Midlands. So next slide, thanks. So yeah, this is all, I suppose, around moving Ireland to a more climate neutral economy, a lower carbon economy, a less carbon intensive economy. So we'll talk briefly about the climate challenge, what just transition means, particularly what that means for Ireland. And Ireland does have a slightly different context. We'll kind of come into on that, where the most impacted communities are, what work's already being done, and then how the Emerge programme will actually work. So first of all, the climate challenge. I mean, I would presume that most people on the webinar today, I think most of us really are aware that the world is heading for more than 2 degrees C of warming. Carbon emissions need to be cut because this degree of warming has severe consequences, and it's not only for the environment. I think, as we're all becoming aware, this is also a societal issue, an economic issue. Countries across the world are decarbonising their economies. Sometimes that can be in the form of low carbon transport strategies, low carbon housing strategies. But at its core, this is often really about energy generation and moving away from fossil fuels to something else. So in Ireland, the government took a decisive step really to accelerate the cessation of industrial peat harvesting and to invest significantly in renewables. And on the one hand, that certainly removes carbon emissions from peat burning, but actually another factor here is that is allowing the remediation of bogs. Bogs are a major carbon sink, so that's a real kind of positive. And these remediated bogs in turn create other opportunities, and we'll hear a bit about them as we go through this webinar today. So in terms of policy, at a European level, the European Green Deal and the European Just Transition Mechanism recognise that actually all the regions and communities in the EU need support in this. These are major shifts in economies, major shifts in energy generation, and quite considerable impacts on communities. And countries and communities need help with this if they're going to meet their kind of climate neutrality goals by 2050. So the EU Just Transition Mechanism provides 55 billion euros of funding across the EU between now and 2027. Of that, Ireland's receiving 84.5 million euros, which is being matched by the Irish government. So that creates a 169 million euro fund, which can then be used to support those most impacted by the just transition and by the cessation of peat harvesting. And that in turn has kind of committed the Irish government to reduce Ireland's greenhouse gas emissions by just over 50% against 2018 levels by 2030. So it's a pretty ambitious target, I think, in the Irish context. It's certainly, I would say, one of the more ambitious targets in the European Union. But I think it's important to understand that there is a considerable amount of financial assistance and expertise that is kind of working with the Irish government and Irish counties and Irish communities to make that a reality. So the consequences of this move to climate neutrality, as we said before, the cessation of industrial peat cutting. I think the closure of ESB and Bord na Móna facilities was, quite a shock event, because I think people knew it was probably coming, but it was quite accelerated. And ESB and Bord na Móna were not only power generating facilities, they, I think, are part of the kind of socioeconomic fabric of the region, and therefore, that creates quite a shock. But it does create opportunities as well, particularly environmental and biodiversity opportunities around the re-wetting and restoration of the peatland areas. But also, I think the funding opportunities from the EU and Irish government are allowing opportunities for communities to take a step back really and think about what they want their economy to look like going forward, and what opportunities there might be, what the skills and investment requirements are in order to deliver them. So the just transition really at its heart is about ensuring that no communities are left behind. At this point about enabling communities to decide what their future looks like, to have agency over their future, and to shape their economy for what they want it to look like going forward. And for some communities, that's around green energy. For other communities, that's around tourism opportunities. For other communities, it's around pursuing kind of sectoral innovation hubs or business incubation hubs. For others, it's around kind of low carbon travel. And some communities are pursuing projects in a number of those areas. And all of those will hopefully allow those communities to end up with a more diverse economy, an inclusive economy that gives people opportunity where perhaps that opportunity would not have existed without this transition. So just to briefly give you a few kind of headlines of the way just transition is kind of manifesting in Longford and Roscommon. In Longford, first of all, the whole Blueway and Greenway tourism on the River Shannon. I mean, I think the Blueways and Greenways generally are fantastic opportunities. We understand that there are large volumes of tourists that visit Ireland, particularly many of them come through Dublin, but also a lot visit the kind of coastal areas of Ireland. Historically, perhaps less have come into the kind of heartlands and the Midlands region, but that can easily change. And I think the Blueways and Greenways are a fantastic way of kind of bringing people in and are creating really interesting tourism and angling destinations. Looking also at Lochray, the green energy and circular economy initiatives around the former Lochray power station. Again, this is a bit of a combination really of kind of heritage tourism, circular economy and green energy. So really interesting the way a number of different themes can come together. And the Just Transition Fund is now supporting studies at that power station with the ambition of creating a whole bunch of demonstration projects this year. In Roscommon, I think there's a lot of work going on to meet demands for remote working. Remote working is increasingly a kind of one of the preferred new routes for working, particularly post-COVID. And it's interesting that the Roscommon County Development Plan, has plans in that for remote working facilities and training facilities, such as the one at Moor in South Roscommon. Again, also, as we saw in Longford, industrial heritage tourism, looking to adapt the industrial assets of some of the Bord-na-Mona facilities, such as the Clontusket Bord-na-Mona Machinery Works. These create opportunities for education, for tourism, and even as we see here for visitor centre and organic farm. So there are one thing we found out in the time we've been working on this project with our partners at the wheel is there is no end of enthusiasm, no end of ideas. What is happening is that some communities are very ready to act on those ideas. Others need a bit more help. And I think, the ideas, if we go to the next slide, the ideas that are being taken forward are kind of broadly kind of coalescing around these sort of themes. So the 21 communities that we'll be working with, we would expect that there would be projects around kind of upskill and reskilling in green sectors. That could be retrofitting of housing, it could be solar, it could be ground source heat pumps, could be renewables. Community-owned energy is, I think, a really interesting opportunity because it does create, hopefully, an ongoing revenue stream that can then be reinvested into other community projects. I think tourism opportunities, they can be heritage tourism, environmental tourism. There are a lot of different opportunities that different communities are already pursuing in that space. sectoral development we've seen in food and drink, in manufacturing, in digital and tech, and low carbon travel, such as electric vehicles. And then I think my last slide before I hand over to Mairead is just highlight that actually in these themes, lots of work already happening. There are a number of community-owned energy projects. I think many of you will be familiar with the work of Sustainable Energy Authority Ireland, who are doing a lot of fantastic work, and we're working quite closely with them and comparing notes. There are a lot, as we said, kind of new modes of tourism, using historical assets, using heritage sites, using the environment, the re-wetted peatlands, etc. A lot of work already going on in sectoral innovation, in green skills, in these kind of multi-use community hubs, and in education, training, and upskilling. But as I said, some of these activities are taking place in some communities, but have not yet been able to be kind of brought to fruition in others. Some communities are extremely well mobilized and organized and have a lot of expertise, and we're really keen to tap into that expertise. Other communities have a much lower level of readiness and actually need some help kind of coming together in some kind of institutional form or prioritizing which projects they should take forward. So we're really keen to work with communities at all the different levels of kind of activation, and to help them overcome the hurdles that they're experiencing. And that'll be partly through expertise that we provide and the Wheel provides, and partly it'll be through putting them in contact with others who are already kind of going through this process.